All right, I'll get the recording going and formally welcome everyone to the public forum here on our vulnerability action plan for the village core area. This is another in a series of public sessions where we are looking at our village core area and trying to determine some strategies to protect our various assets from the rising seas and the bigger storms that are coming our way. So we have with us our team, our consulting team from Fussin O'Neill, so Alex Maxwell heading that team up, and also Joe from Woods Hole Group as part of the technical team. And so yes, we're a small group tonight, so we can be more informal. Francie, I appreciate you being on as one of the non-steering committee members, so we appreciate you being here. So yes, Alex, why don't we have you do share the screen and get the draft report up, and you can walk us through that, and we can fairly quickly get into comments and questions and suggestions that folks may have.
That sounds good. That sounds good. And could I trouble you, Greg? I have a block on the screen sharing abilities at the moment. If I could just trouble you to
Yeah, I think I need Sue to do that because she took over hosting.
Thanks, Sue. All right, thumbs up. Great. Thanks, Sue. So I will just flip over to our other screen here. So just want to echo Greg's welcome remarks there, just thanking everyone for the time this evening to talk about the Coastal Vulnerability Action Plan. This is the draft plan that we've developed. As Greg mentioned, looking at long-term actions that could be taken to enhance coastal resilience and provide a greater level of risk reduction to coastal flooding in the inner harbor here in Manchester. So what I'll do is just very briefly give you an overview of the plan. I'll kind of highlight its core structure and then quickly flip through it and then turn it over to the group that we have here assembled for questions and comments. I'll just preface this by saying there is quite a bit in the plan. This is the culmination of about 7 months worth of work, as I'll mention here, ranging from field studies right the way through to scenario concept development and an alternatives analysis. So we recognize that you may need some more time with the plan, and I'll start by actually sharing the mechanisms that we've put in place to solicit some additional feedback before we finalize this and submit it to our funding partner, which is Coastal Zone Management, the CZM folks, which I think I see. Yeah, Catherine's on the call. Good to see you, Catherine. All right, so I will just dive in to the plan here. So as I mentioned, I just wanted to start with this page here, which is included in the draft plan. This will not be included in the final, but this is a landing page for folks that may come across the plan when it's shared out through other channels, or if they have been following along with the project website. We've set up a couple of feedback forms and mechanisms for folks to provide input on the plan. We've highlighted here that we would love to hear any additional feedback specifically on those actions that are recommended with the different alternative scenarios. And then in addition to that, any other information that you feel should be incorporated in the plan. We really do welcome feedback here. But just to quickly get into it, we have a list of all of our project team and partners. You can see quite a number of folks involved here. Greg kindly mentioned that we had a steering committee formed to help guide this work. And Laura, who's actually on the call, is a member of our steering committee. And we had several others on a earlier call this week. We, as a consultant group here at Fussin O'Neill, have been working hand in hand with our teaming partners at Woods Hole Group, which Joe represents, to realize this work. And we've had as well the kind oversight of our partners at Coastal Zone Management there. And Catherine, as I mentioned before, is on the call. So here's where I'll just give an overview of what's included in the plan. The plan is broken into 4 core components that really mirror the planning stages that we took to realize this overall action plan. So the first section really covers the project background, not only explaining kind of why this plan, why prop up something like this, but also beyond just the motivation for creating a plan like this, what was the planning approach that we took? What was our approach to community engagement throughout the course of the plan? And so that section really highlights what was done there and provides additional links to, say, for example, in the community engagement section, where you can actually find on the project website additional recordings of past meetings, past meeting presentations, all of those materials we wanted to document throughout the course of the project. So that's what's included in section 1 there. Section 2 is where we start getting into a little bit more of the science or the development of the evidence base that really informed the alternative scenarios and concepts that were developed for coastal resilience as part of this plan. So during the early stages of the project, over the course of December and January, we collected quite a bit of data on past studies and plans and mapping information that town staff had on hand. And in addition to that, also conducted site visits, collected data on coastal resource areas. Joe and his colleagues at Woods Hole Group helped us not only do a coastal resource area delineation, but also a critical elevation survey where we went out and surveyed all of the low points for entries into buildings surrounding the inner harbor. And so that's what's really summarized in that chunk. And then after section 2, we really explained then how we took the evidence base, the science, the information that we collected in the second part of the planning process and fed it into a very targeted vulnerability assessment, looking at the vulnerability of the inner harbor to both current but also future projected coastal flooding conditions. As you'll see in the subheadings here, we explain a little bit of our overall approach to the vulnerability assessment, and then also talk about how we approached it from kind of 2 prongs, looking at influences of tidal flooding, but also influences of storm surge and our use of the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, or the MCFRM. So we unpack that a little bit and then provide some mapping visuals to really explain the vulnerability of particular structures to different types of storm probability events. So if you have plugged in for other past public meetings, you would have seen a lot of those vulnerability maps that we shared. And in addition, it's worth mentioning that we also added in here a marsh migration analysis that was done to look at how marsh ecosystems might change or might move in the future in light of changes in the sea level. So that's a little bit of what's included there. I'll mention, like the second chapter or the second section, if you will, included in the third section are additional references to the studies which are included in the appendices of the plan. What we really tried to do in the main body of the plan was kind of keep it to pithy summaries, kind of distilling the most critical information as it relates in this case to the vulnerability assessment. And then the fourth and final major section of the plan was the development of these alternative scenarios and recommended actions, looking at different planning horizons and trying to lay out both in plan form, but also in a narrative description, what actions could be taken in the near term, in the medium term, the long term, to help provide a level of risk reduction to coastal flooding conditions. And again, if you had attended our previous meeting back in May, where we laid out some of these scenarios, you would have seen some of the mapping with that before. However, new in this draft plan was all the other work that we did in trying to accompany all those actions with estimates for order of magnitude costs associated with those actions. So you can kind of see a little bit more as to how, or rather what what these things might cost in terms of the actions proposed. So that's a little look at the big chunks of the plan, if you will. We did include all our references to any references made in the main body of the text, in addition to any of the references to the data that we collected, reviewed, and used to inform this plan. And then we've included, importantly, more detailed descriptions of some of the studies that were involved in developing this plan, from the resource area delineation to the vulnerability assessment. So next, what I'll do is I'm just going to take a page flip through the plan. I won't spend any amount of time or a long amount of time in any one section. I just want to kind of flip through the plan so folks can get a sense for what it actually looks like. And then I'll leave the plan up, and we can go back in if you want more details on a particular aspect of the plan, or have questions or comments on a particular aspect of the plan. But what I'll spend the next 2 or 3 minutes doing is just kind of quickly flipping through to give you the whirlwind tour of the plan. So this is what the first section looks like on the project background. Includes a description of the motivation behind the project, along with our planning approach, explaining the 4-phased approach that we took since we started the development of the plan back in December. As I mentioned before, we have a section on the community engagement. This is just a sampling of what was done for community engagement. It does give a nod to and recognition of our steering committee that helped guide the development of this plan, but it also provides links to where you can find more information on the community engagement activities that were propped up as part of this plan. In section 2, we have a review of the existing conditions, as I mentioned. We provide a high-level overview of the types of data that were collected as part of this phase of the project, and then all of the actual references are included in Appendix A, so we don't lose record of what was informative to the planning process. This is where we also provide a brief summary of the resource area delineation that was conducted. This has benefits, I'll just mention quickly, to not only informing the concepts that were developed, but also should we move forward with the implementation of certain near-term actions, it's really important to have a coastal delineation done when then trying to approach permitting. So this was a really useful step to not only inform the concepts, but also set up Manchester for success moving forward with the implementation of projects. This is a brief summary of our critical elevation survey. And then we get into the vulnerability assessment, and it's a little bit front-loaded by descriptions of what the vulnerability assessment is, how it's broken into considerations of tidal flooding, but also storm surge. So there's a little bit of technical information in here. It does incorporate some of the feedback that we kindly received in past meetings from either members of the steering committee or the public about just what types of data are being used to inform our understanding of sea level rise and these models that are being used. So we really do try and unpack that in this section. We highlight the work that was done in deploying a local flood gauge to really localize the data that we have on tidal information here. Provides a little bit of information on the data that was collected early on in the project. I got to give credit to Joe and his team that created a really beautiful graphic here, which I really think summarizes the tidal flooding conditions, the future projected tidal conditions, which is really informative to just understand what might happen on a more regular basis in terms of just high tide flooding throughout our study area in the Inner Harbor. Provide a description of the coastal flood risk model. Give our elevations for the different flood model conditions here with some technical descriptions. But then we very quickly get into some of the mapping that was done, which was really informative to really visualize the impacts on various planning horizons, starting with the 2030, moving to the 2050 and the 2070. And then, as I mentioned before, a little note on marsh migration model that was used here to inform a little assessment of marsh ecosystem movement over time, assuming that there would not be any obstructions here under future conditions. And then finally, just very quickly, section 4 really gets into the heart of our alternatives and recommended actions, looking at different planning scenarios. So in the near term, using more or less the 2030 planning horizon as a guide, we developed a visual scenario, which you see on this slide here, for the various actions that could be taken to address near-term coastal flooding issues. In the near term, a lot of it's focused on protecting critical infrastructure through floodproofing, but also elevating critical infrastructure like generators where needed. And then just flipping back a page, as I mentioned before, each of these concepts is complemented by an estimated order of magnitude cost for various actions, along with notes on potential implementation challenges and some of the feedback that we heard along the way as well. And then with each of these scenarios, we just tried to ground it in a few other visuals to give folks a sense for what some of these actions actually look like. So when we recommend deploying a tide gauge for long-term monitoring of sea level rise and also potentially to use as an early warning system, it's maybe hard to visualize what that actually looks like. That's what we try to do with each of these scenarios here. And so our scenario 2 looks at the medium to long term, so really actions that could be taken between now and the 2050 to 2070 time horizon. Unlike the near-term scenario, this focuses on more neighborhood level actions that could be taken to really address larger flooding issues, looking at some of the flood probability impacts a little further out in the future. So here you'll see introduction of things like berms, road raisings, kind of more disruptive actions to be taken to provide more area-wide levels of protection or risk reduction throughout the inner harbor. One of the big components of this I'll just touch on is a note about really needing to look at decommissioning the wastewater treatment plant and constructing a new submersible pump station, recognizing that that is one of the most vulnerable pieces of critical infrastructure in the area, and looking further out to the 2050 and 2070 time horizons, it is very, very vulnerable, and it would be worth considering how to plan ahead for relocating or decommissioning and connecting force mains to other infrastructure. And we have a little flip through of some of those actions. You can kind of see a little bit of what a berm actually looks like, what a remotely deployable flood barrier looks like. We also called out a floodable park with Masconomo, so giving a sense for what that looks like with some of the 3D modeling that we've done through some of our past work, but also some photo visuals there. And then we have 2 long-term scenarios. These are kind of more out of the box type of scenarios, looking at actions that could be taken by 2070 and beyond. These would be even more disruptive actions that could be taken. But upon receiving feedback from the community about what would it look like if we could raise the rail through the inner harbor, or what would it look like if we just planned for a full out retreat? That's what we worked up in these sections here. So this was the scenario that some of you may have seen before related to raising the rail and installing a floodgate on the inner harbor. Gave some examples of that. And then we also worked up, as I mentioned, an all-out retreat or a full retreat scenario here too, where you would look at retreating from all those potential vulnerable flood areas and restoring that back to a more natural ecosystem, which would of course change the way the waterfront looks in Manchester. And we were careful not to say that we were proposing that any one of these long-term scenarios should be looked at more with more preference than any other. We really wanted to just put these out there, especially in terms like of the rail raising scenario, as a way to start conversations about the longer term thinking and potentially engage really critical partners that would need to be engaged to really even consider these longer term alternatives like the MBTA. So that's a little flip through there. As I mentioned, you have the references and then all of the appendices. I won't flip through those, but all of the appendices are included at the end, where you can find more information on the granular details of some of the studies that were done. So with that, I will flip it back over to folks and take a pause from talking myself here and just see if there are any initial questions, comments, reactions that folks would like to share with the group here. And feel free to just either raise your hand. I think I can see all the squares now on my other screen here, or just chime in. I see Laura's kindly raising the virtual hand here. Laura,
Sure.
please go
Hi,
ahead.
Alex.
Hi.
Well, I haven't really had a chance to dig into the report since it just got released yesterday. I've really done no more than flip through it. So this is more of a comment based on a quick glance tonight and our past meetings. It looks to me like really solid work. And I think there is, what comes to mind as I'm sort of paging through it are what this might sort of generate as a conversation as people flip through who are not involved in the planning process. And so this report will become public and kind of live out there for a while. The couple of things I'm wondering at sort of first blush are, do we talk, I know we show projections of the sea level rise. Do we talk about the kind of risks of not acting? I know we're showing these different scenarios and we're not preferencing one over the other for long-term right now. And there's lots more planning to be done, but there's also, this shows a lot of change, which I think is going to be, take some getting used to for people. So do we talk about the risk of not acting? That's question one. And then maybe to Greg and sort of our town governance, how do we kind of push this out in a way that does kind of qualify it as like really good data, starting the conversation, no decisions have been made, but we ought to be thinking about this because it is going to, some of these things that are longer term scenarios are also going to take quite a number of years and funding to get, and there is funding out there now. So, I guess to Greg and Chuck and team, like, how do you get from here to there in a governance kind of way?
So Greg, do you want to take the second part of the question, then I can circle back to the first, or?
Sure.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, so I do see this as a starting point for community conversations. So I think it's, as you say, there's a lot of information in here. I think the team has done a very good job of laying it out in a report that is dense with information, but is laid out in a way that I think it makes it accessible. At least that's my hope. There are a lot of graphics, and I think that helps people.
Yeah, I agree.
To pick up some of that data. So yes, I think this, even though we're coming to the end of this phase, it really marks the beginning of more intensive community conversations. And we'll be needing to speak with the select board, in more detail about how to structure that, whether we beef up the sustainability committee and they become sort of the flagship committee that advances this, or is it a combination of the steering committee in conjunction with sustainability and planning board? I mean, those are some questions that we'll have to iron out, the next few months, in terms of how to continue to engage and further engage the community on these concepts and what choices we're going to need to make. There are a lot of important and hard choices that'll be needed. So I see that as a multi-year process. This will be iterative. We will take some of the more low-hanging fruit, if you will, for recommendations that I think will be easier to implement. Certainly elevating generators and floodproofing some doors and garages. Those are going to be pretty easy to do, and we'll proceed with that. Looking at some of the drainage pipes and putting the one-way valves on them so that they don't become a conduit for more flooding. That'll be a proposal we put in. Actually, we've got Alex and his team working on that already for another round of state funding. So there'll be things that move forward quickly, others that will take a lot more discussion, and we'll have to think through what that structure looks like.
Makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And Chuck, I don't know, are you raising your hand to piggyback on Greg's
Yeah,
comment, or do you? Okay,
can-
yeah,
can
I
you hear me?
figured that might be the case. I'll let you chime in, and then Laura, I can address the first part of your question after.
I thought it was worth mentioning also that a lot of these bigger ticket items that are several years out currently are also things that we've been working on in other arenas. So our facility plan, is also taking into account the recommendations from this study, but also separately. So with coastal zone management and vulnerability is one thing, but we also have a lot of infrastructure that is aging that will need to be addressed. Certainly in the medium time frame, but maybe even sooner rather than later. So I think it's important that it's not just one thing that's pushing us in certain directions. It's a lot of things in town. So I thought that was something that we should put out there. This is taking into account a lot of different things, but there are other implications of certain recommendations that we'll be looking at. So the facility master plan, looking at the treatment plant is something that we've certainly been doing a lot. So for other reasons. So I think, this kind of dovetailed in with that very, very nicely. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And I will just say to that point, where we knew about active plans or past studies that did have relevance to some of the actions in the text description, like we provided a mention of all the facilities planning that is going on, especially in connection to considerations around future actions related to the wastewater treatment plant. So we tried to pull in those connections as well, so that this plan didn't stand in kind of isolation of all the other good work that's happening, and certainly has is related to the actions proposed in this plan. But Laura, I don't want to lose the point to your question about the sort of like do nothing scenario. It's kind of covered in two ways. So the full retreat is actually a look at, like, if you really didn't put in anything and the bare minimum you did was demolish, clear, and restore really vulnerable areas, large swaths of vulnerable areas by that long-term time frame. That's what we tried to realize in that. But even looking kind of like more short term at the do nothing, a lot of that's actually nicely covered in the vulnerability assessment, where you could just recognize, at what elevation of still water surface level would you have at different planning horizons, and that kind of tells you, where you're more likely to impact different buildings throughout that inner core. And so while not all of those flood storm probability maps have like cost estimates, because that was a little outside of our scope, that at least paints a little bit of that, even the near term picture. But the real sort of do nothing long-term scenario was what we tried to include in scenario 3B there at the very end.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jessica, I see you're kindly raising your hand here. Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I think I just want to piggyback onto what Laura said, that I think it may not be part of this plan to try and associate some costs to this, but I think that certainly in the discussion with the greater public going forward, that will be really important, so that people understand it's not, don't do any of this stuff, there's zero cost, but it's, don't do this stuff, and then, what the other costs would be. Because as much as you guys have made it all clear to those of us who I think have been following along and kind of understand some of this, I think for a lot of people, those models and stuff are still kind of confusing. So, so I think Laura's point was excellent and something we should definitely factor in going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And I'll maybe quickly flip through to it here just to let you know. So for that long-term full retreat scenario, what we did try to do is cost out, what would it actually mean to buy out, go through demolition, material removal, assuming, no contamination. If you have contamination, that kind of throws the cost estimates into a little bit of whack there, but also the restoration pieces and what would need to be done at a minimum to the wastewater treatment plant. So we do have a little bit of costing to at least go along with the do nothing long-term scenario, which I think is really helpful for folks to then help contextualize that when you juxtapose it with other long-term actions, like something as aggressive as elevating a rail and adding a tide gate. So we at least try to do that for this long-term do nothing.
And Alex, just a quick clarification, this action plan, you have posted it to the project site?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that at the front end. This is all on the website. So there's a version of it that you can flip through there. So it's out there. I would definitely encourage, if anyone on this call has other networks in town that they're plugged into to help disseminate this, more widely. It'd be great to start doing that now. As you mentioned, Greg, this is like meant to be as well, like a start of a conversation here too, to really socialize the concepts, the work that's been done as part of this plan more widely. But yes, it is publicly available
Yeah, great.
via the website.
Yeah.
Yep, which I can put up here. You can get to it through this URL here, or even clicking through here.
Yeah, and Sue, we have a link to that on our website, the town website.
Yeah, I see Nate's nodding his head. I forget which
Yes.
bin of projects
Sorry.
it's
Yep.
in, but it is there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And I just realized we have some chat comments here too.
So that was one of the chat.
Oh, thanks. Oh, Greg, you're helping me moderate. That's great. It's hard to see. Sometimes those windows get hidden, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Any
no-
other comments or thoughts or initial reactions folks would like to share?
Alex, I don't want to hog the speaker here, but I do have
No.
just a couple follow-up
Yeah,
questions.
please.
So on the do nothing, I think the full retreat is one scenario, but I think the do nothing, as I was thinking about it, is a bit different, which is the cost of not acting. So the full retreat is still taking some actions. There are different kinds of actions having to do with, buyouts or movement of those activities. But I think there
Right.
is a do nothing scenario that is that also has costs on it, which aren't construction costs necessarily. They're more property damage, insurance related, operational cost, and recognizing that it's outside of the scope of the report here to cost those things. I wonder if we do want to kind of speak to some of the ramifications of a do nothing, which is really kind of not taking action or taking only the kind of short-term action, which are the low-hanging fruit. Like if we do that and then we sort of stop before the medium and long-term, that
Yeah.
would be another cost and another kind of risk to the town, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a point well made, Laura. And I think that's something we could easily incorporate into the final draft of this plan, at least to make mention that there are costs associated with the no action being taken, both,
Mhm.
at present day, right the way through to the long-term scenario. So we can work that in maybe somewhere in the overall, before we lay out somewhere between this page and this page, where we kind of explain, the outside of these scenarios where you are taking action, what does it mean to have no action taken? And we would stop short of trying to cost all that out. 'Cause it
Sure,
is a
that's
little,
complicated.
that would
Yeah.
be a good study, a little outside of our scope, but I think it warrants mentioning there, and we can certainly incorporate that. That's a really
Yeah,
good
even
piece
in
of
a
feedback.
narrative format, I think it would
Right.
be helpful just to help people understand the consequences of that as well. I do think the visuals, the precedent visuals are very, very helpful. It's the visuals of the maps are great too, but this is a highly technical issue. And so it is going to be the communications piece of it is really important. And I think the visuals really help that. And I haven't flipped through, but I think you've got some examples of kind of the opportunities as well. When you talk about the floodable park and more public
Yes.
access, there are a lot of challenges here, but there are also some opportunities So speaking to those and providing some visuals of those, I think is helpful.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and we know like these are actions that well, let's say for like the floating boardwalk aren't necessarily intended to have a physical benefit in terms of reduced risk reduction on the part of coastal flooding. But one of the things that our team thought was important to express is with some of these conditions and maybe looking at Masconomo as a future potential floodable park, that's a major community asset. And that the issues are sort of being forced to re-examine what is the connection to the waterfront, how could it be used culturally, and with the community, recognizing the uses that are already in place, what could be protected, what might need to be reprogrammed elsewhere. So we threw those in there as a nod to that, to say, obviously we're focused on the flood piece, but you can't do that in isolation of the other kind of critical project opportunities that this creates. And I'll just add, because I know Greg kindly mentioned it, we are looking at developing a grant for this next round of CZM, not only to take care of some of the as Greg put it, those low-hanging fruit actions, but as part of that, we would like to include a piece that would at least start the proactive planning process to look at Masconomo Park and do the actual visioning exercises and the kind of modeling work that we do here on some of our other projects, to make that a little bit more visual for folks, but I think it also makes it real for folks, and then also let folks feel like they have a hand in shaping that it's not all just going to convert to salt marsh necessarily.
And it could be a real economic driver for the town, as well as providing a public benefit in terms of public access. I know there's a harbor plan study going on now, so
Right.
maybe this kind of information gets incorporated into the work that's going with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, I saw a hand go up here quickly. Dave. Oh, there you
Yeah.
go, Dave.
Sure. Just to add into what Laura was just commenting about, I mean, you're showing the floating boardwalk here in Manchester. I think you guys have seen, we have, at Reed Park, an existing docking system, and, there's plans to tie that into the Fisherman's Wharf area. So I think it's the same thing as, is it, when you say floating boardwalk, is it something similar to what Manchester is already pursuing? And there's talk about extending the Reed Park one right down to the train bridge.
Yeah, so this where we really looked at, Dave, it's a good question, where we really looked at the potential for being able to create a connection through a floating boardwalk was, right around that entryway to Masconomo Park, around the park here, down and along this section of the inner harbor, along the bulkhead there. So we're not fully apprised of all the plans, and if this dovetails nicely with other plans that we can call out as part of this plan, that would be really great to mention here. But the idea would be that you could lock it up against the shoreline and have it be able to come up and down with the tides and with sea level rise.
Yeah, seems like a good idea to try to tie in the existing plans to this proposal. Because I think you're going to save a lot of costs. I think some of it's already going to be there.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, Dave, and we'll make sure we can slip that mention of that plan into the narrative here. And I see, sorry, a couple of other, oh, thanks, Chuck. I think Chuck has kindly provided links to the project webpage, both the direct page webpage for the action plan, and then I think the overall home page for the plan there. Thanks, Chuck. And Dave, I see your hand's still up. Did you, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had another comment there, feel free to chime in again.
No problem. I'm lowering my hand, and thanks, Chuck. I was on the project documents link. I guess that doesn't have it. But I see you have a whole separate tab there for the action plan. So it's clear now where that file is.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Good. All right. I've heard from a couple of folks here, but I just want to give folks who've maybe been a bit quieter thus far, maybe just kind of mulling it over. If you have some thoughts you'd like to share, just want to open it up for other voices here. I won't put anybody on the spot, I promise. Joe, I'll maybe offer it to you because I know I've been the only like project team person speaking, but did you have anything you wanted to just say about the project overall, or any comments to add that you think, and just kind of glossing over the plan you would want to add from your end too? I mean, we've been like a tag team on this, so I just want to give you a chance to speak too.
Yeah, no, I think you covered everything quite well as always, Alex. I guess the only thing I'd mention is that, we're always looking at ways to make these recommendations flexible in their implementation over time, so that with all of the uncertainty, and that has been a topic of discussion throughout this project around sea level rise, that there's a plan in place to respond to changing conditions, but incremental steps along the way, and opportunities identified to link up and build sequentially rather than going too much too soon.
Yeah, that's a good comment to make. So this is, I think we used the term earlier, like really meant to be a living document. As science continues to improve and scenarios continue to take shape as we kind of hone in on that confidence interval in the future. You can certainly revisit these ideas over time and look at perhaps different alternatives that may need to be moved up in the timeline, or perhaps some actions that you might be able to hold off on for a little bit. So I think as part of the near term scenario, part of the idea with that tide gauge was that you could kind of do some of your own monitoring and tie that back to future studies as needed. And I think from here, also just really looking for those opportunities to implement low-hanging fruit. And I think those, especially in that near-term scenario, have been laid out for folks.
Yeah, and I'd also add sort of the opportunities that we've heard from Chuck and Nate to link up with existing plans makes a lot of sense when you have a plan to replace some infrastructure over time, and then you can design for future conditions and over the lifespan of that next phase of the infrastructure. Or if you have something that is you're sort of plan to having keeping that in place for a while, then you have some time frame over which to respond for reducing those risks to flooding until you need to act again. So that sort of idea of exposure service life and the vulnerability over those periods.
Yeah, that's a good point, Joe. Chuck, I see you kindly raising your hand here again. Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I just thought since we are recording this, and I think these do make it on the town YouTube and probably the page for the action plan, it might be worth discussing some of the stuff that came up last night with the MBTA, and if they have existing plans or could potentially have plans, and that was one of the bigger long-term ones. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that for 2 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, no, Chuck, thanks for bringing that up. Just to provide some context, we had an earlier meeting with our steering committee where we kind of drilled down in a little bit more detail on each of these future scenarios. And as part of one of the long-term scenarios, I'll just put it up here for reference. So you don't have to just listen to me talk, but you can look at something as well. But as part of one of the long-term scenarios here where we were proposing a future rail raising, the comment got raised, is anybody aware of plans that are already in place to do things like the rail raising along the line here? What does this mean in terms of long-term coordination? And I think really what we were able to come to, some consensus on, or at least express as part of that earlier meeting was, to our knowledge, there isn't sort of like a long-term rail raising plan along this corridor that we know of. Certainly, this isn't the only low-lying area of the line. And so it would require more of a regionalized approach to addressing the issues with potential coastal flooding along the line. But what we also mentioned in the prior meeting was this scenario in and of itself would be a really great conversation starter to engage folks at the MBTA about kind of the long-term planning for coastal resilience of the line stretching out to Rockport. So, while we don't have any, direct connections into, the MBTA's thinking on the long-term plans for this rail, I think it would be a very good next step. Even though this is presented as a very long-term scenario, I think the conversations around such a big move could start early. And I know, Laura, you could probably speak to this too, having been in other steering committee meetings where we talked about this as well. The line seems like it'll be a pretty critical part to the Commonwealth achieving, some of the goals it has around economic development, long-term sustainability, carbon emissions reductions goals, all of those types of things. So I think while it's important in this context to talk about it, in terms of coastal flooding impacts and all that, tying it into sort of larger agendas will also be a big part of that conversation. And I think what could hopefully move the needle where you can show an alignment of needs there. Chuck, does that cover your question or your comment there?
Yep, I think it'll be good for, when people read back or watch back on this.
Great. No, thanks for chiming in with that. All right. I'll just pause for one more moment. See if let me just check the chat as well. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Any other voices we haven't heard from that would like to speak up?
Alex, just a question on logistics. How long will the comment period last on the draft report?
Yeah, so we're under it's a good question. And I have a kind of unfortunate response, which is to say we have to finalize everything by Friday of next week to submit it.
Okay.
But that doesn't have to be like the end of comments. We will leave that feedback form open beyond even like the end of the grant term so that we can continue to solicit feedback and as maybe we work towards future grants through CZM or other grant mechanisms, we could look at updating and incorporating that. I mean, the project website is awesome. It's not going to like go dead at the end of next week. That's meant to live out in time. So that can be added to and updated and changed as well. But in terms of any comments that you'd like to get into the final plan, it'd be really great. I know it's a short turnaround. But we're in a bit of a time crunch with the end of the grant period here at the end of next week. I know.
Good to know. That's super helpful, actually, just to have a deadline.
Yeah.
And I think to your point of it being a living document, we will want to. This will continue, and there'll be next phases of it. So it'll continue to get updated, hopefully by future phases of work.
Don't worry,
Yeah.
Laura. Every once in a while we get a freebie, so we'll cash that in.
Excellent. Thanks, Chuck.
And I'm sure Catherine was going, oh no, it's coming in right under the deadline. But I promise, Catherine, it's coming.
I was just hoping to hear you say, Alex, that it will be in next Friday. But
Yeah.
I agree. It's this is obviously the most important part of this is the planning that's going on and not we need our deliverables in because of the grant timing and so
Right.
forth. But obviously it's going to be an ongoing process. So
Right.
no worries there.
Yeah. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, I think as a community, we're committed to making sure that this continues on. And like I say, I really view this as a strong beginning, and it'll lay the groundwork for ongoing conversations and continue updating and improvements. So Alex, I do want to thank you and the team. It's been you've brought together a good group of professionals. It's reflected well in this draft document. So my hat's off to you and Joe and the others that have worked hard on this, and very much appreciate those efforts.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I appreciate the kind words there. And we just want to echo the thanks. It's been really great having a very active steering committee, folks showing up for public meetings. We had a public meeting and a steering committee meeting at every phase in the project, which was really great just to have folks so engaged. And it's just really nice to work so closely with the town staff as well. So yeah, just really appreciate it from our end too. I saw Joe kind of nodding his head earlier too. I'm
agree. It
sure
was a
I don't want to
pleasure working
speak.
with
I don't
y'all.
want to speak for Joe, but I'm sure he
Yeah.
feels the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's been a really great project, and we're really excited about trying to get some work done, going after other grants and start on the actual kind of like coupling implementation of those low-hanging fruit with additional proactive planning and just kind of working in sequence with that.
So yeah, a milestone, but not the end for sure. It's
Yeah.
It's phase one.
Yeah, no, that's well put there. Well, I'll just, I don't see any more hands being raised. I just want to leave this page up here for a second, just to remind folks, please feel free to, sometimes if you're like me, you're like walking the dog later at night and you have those moments where you're going, I wish I'd said that or I'd asked that. This doesn't have to be the end of the communication line here. There's ways to register your feedback anonymously through a form. If you feel comfortable reaching out to me directly, I've included my email on this feedback page as well. So all that to say, like, we'd really love to hear from you, and the conversation, even if you think of feedback or ideas, out over the summer, or things that come to mind as you're getting out and enjoying more of the Inner Harbor in the summer. We'd love to hear about that as we look forward to hopefully implementing more of these actions and doing more of the planning around some of the actions proposed in these scenarios. So that's it from my end. My final plug for additional feedback, and Greg, I can let you close us out if you'd like.
Okay, all right. Well, yes, I guess I was starting to do that, wasn't I? Just by thanking you and the team, and I thank the steering committee and the public for the input and guidance that has provided so far, and looking forward to continuing that. And we'll make sure that this document gets well circulated and is part of future planning and planning discussions that we have, both with the harbor and with downtown development, et cetera. So thanks again, and we appreciate everyone's participation, and we'll look forward to continuing on in the future here. So
Great work. Thank you all.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good
Bye.
night.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.